Welcome to the Mother Tree Network podcast. Gorgeous. This is Aminata, Desert Rose Plant Walker Firewoman, and I am your host. Today I'm joined by Josea Crossley, who is the founder of Dark Woods of Grief. And we're going to talk about how do you grieve something big like a hurricane or a war, but also some of the individual grief experiences that we have and ways that we can be healthy and whole with our grief. So, Josia, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really great to be here and to get to meet your community and see you.
I want to start with the question that's on all of our minds right now, which is, of course, we're in hurricane season and we've had two major hurricanes in the U.S. that have been hugely disruptive. So tell me, how do you grieve something like a hurricane? And is it helpful to
So
grieve?
it's important to recognize that there's all different levels of experience that people are having with something like this. There's the people who are like actually on the ground who have now lived through this experience. Of course, they're experiencing a huge amount of grief and trauma as well. Right. So then we have to put that in the category of complex grief, where it's not just that we need to cry and let it go and honor the losses, but it's also we actually have to like really work with the nervous system, come back to the present moment after something like that. And then there's the people that are connected to them directly, their loved ones that are on the outer circle. And then there's also those of us who are witnessing it from afar and who might not be directly connected to what's happening, but we're aware that it's happening. We're bearing witness to it and having feelings about it. And it's so foreign to the way that our psyches have evolved, because our psyches didn't evolve to be processing things that are happening across the world. We evolved to process things that are tangible and happening in our direct experience. I think it's actually really challenging to be processing this stuff. And a lot of people, particularly when it comes to things like genocide, which is also going on right now in Gaza, Palestine, Lebanon, Congo, and many other places in the world. So we have to be able to work with our feelings, because otherwise we just numb out, we shut down, and we don't actually make a difference.
As you spoke, two things hit me. One is, I wonder if there is an opportunity to up level our consciousness through grief.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be an upleveling of our consciousness and understanding of working with what isn't necessarily tangibly right in our physical reality. I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Mm. Because it seems like the gift and the curse of the
Mm-hmm.
internet is the 24/7 sort of news cycle and just the constant stimulation of our nervous system, which to me, of course, is the negative side of it. But the other possibility of it is we are one. We are connected to each other. And on one level, it's because of specific historical things that our ancestors did or that our governments are currently doing. So it's
Mm-hmm.
on a material level responsibility, but there's also on an energetic level.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So I wonder if we want to be conscious with our grief, if we want the grief from the sense of connection with others to be of service and actually help the collective. Tell us about that.
Yeah, 100%. That's really at the heart of why I do what I do, because I grew up witnessing and directly experiencing in my family the destructive and harmful force that unprocessed grief and trauma can be when it's not held and worked with and navigated in a conscious way. Right. We can certainly witness it in the greater world at this time. I think it's just so absolutely vital if you want to see a better world and have an experience of more connection and joy and aliveness, then we have to work with it consciously. So how do we do that? A lot of people come to me because they've had a major loss and they've been brought to their knees by that experience, right? They no longer have a choice of whether to work with grief or not. It's like you get slammed and you're in it and you're on your knees and you're in the pain and suffering, and there's no other option than to be in it. But it does take some courage to come towards doing the work, to be willing and to build the capacity in ourselves to be able to feel it. It sounds so simple, but it actually requires some level of skill to be able to feel and not blow out the circuitry. Our nervous system is like an electrical system. And if we have too much energy running and we don't know how to move it through, then we actually like almost like short circuit our nervous system. So it does require a level of skill to be able to work with it in a conscious way. And it's doable. It's super doable, but we have to actually start from the ground up and learn how to wire our nervous system. And that's not something that we do alone. It's a relational skill. So we have to do it in relationship with each other.
Okay, that's also what I wanted to talk to you about. So often I have kids who are adults now, but I know I was very protective of them, not wanting my grief to overwhelm them.
Mm-hmm.
So it was coming from a bit of protectiveness, this pattern of going into a bathroom to cry or closing your door to cry alone. I know there are parents out there who are wondering how to hold grief in a way so that you don't overwhelm your kids. That's one
Mm-hmm.
question, if you'd like to take that one on. But the other question is, can we both be the person grieving and the person holding the grieving?
Yeah, 100%. And I love the meditation you did with us earlier because you really brought us into that kind of tender, compassionate holding of the self. That is so necessary. I think of it as one of the skills that we have to build in order to work with grief. And I don't think that's a skill that we necessarily build in isolation.
So
Yeah.
I had this question for you, for us who are like caregivers or who, because of our professions, we give a lot. Do you think it's healthy for us to cry like every day or make a cry date?
I think it totally depends. I think that grief needs a container,
Mm,
right? Like it needs to have a container. So I think that if we know that we have energy that we need to move, and then we need to create regular containers for ourselves for it.
mm.
So whether that means going to a group or I go on my yoga mat every morning and that's the time when I'm going to feel my body and let go of anything I need to feel, or maybe I'm going to go to the beach and put my hands in the water and that's going to be the time, or like just some kind of ritual practice where you're like, okay, this is the thing I do. This is my dedicated time, that whatever energy needs to move will move, because there's always going to be energy that needs to move through. And sometimes it might need to come in the form of tears. Sometimes you might feel pleasure when we tune in. That also is energy that needs to move, right? If I didn't pay attention to it, then I wouldn't know it was there. How does the energy want to move in any given moment or in any given day? Yeah. But I definitely don't think it's unhealthy to cry regularly. If the tears are there, then they got to move, right? Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
for saying that because I know a lot of people in the Mother Tree community cry easily,
Yeah.
me being one of them. And we get
Totally.
told, don't be a
Mhm.
crybaby, all that kind of associative, patriarchal BS.
Exactly. Tears are so healthy. And so my ancestors are mostly Irish and English, but in old Ireland and actually many places in the world, I know Western Africa, there would actually be professional grievers. So when a community needed to grieve or when someone needed to grieve, because someone had died or something else had happened, the professional griever would be literally like paid to come, and their job was to get everybody crying. And they were usually the people like you and I and some of the people in your community who come to the tears easily, right? And so they would start by telling some of their story. They might say, oh yeah, my child, this child, they died and that person died, and then this, and then they start emoting, and then everybody's with them and feeling them and starting to get the energy moving, and then they can start to feel the present moment thing that needs to be grieved. So it's actually really a gift. And I think when I realized that was one of my major gifts, was such a hugely transformative moment for me.
So tell us about how do you grieve? You've talked a lot about grieving in relationship and containers. So how do we grieve collectively? What are some ways to do that?
I would also want to go back to your question about the kids. One of the things that I like to talk about with grieving and with these containers is it's super important to have consent when we're going to have space held for us. So, and it's not only for the people that we're asking to hold space for us, it's also and especially for us, because if we express and get vulnerable and go into our grief, and the person or people who we're doing it with is not ready for it, then we're probably going to have a negative experience. And then also, if we're asking someone to hold space for us, it's important to recognize it can be challenging to hold space. I know. And then in terms of kids, I think as parents, it's important that we don't ask them to hold space for us, if that makes sense, because their nervous systems just aren't ready for that. And it's the role of parents is to hold space for their developing nervous systems so that they can feel safe and have their big emotions, and we help them regulate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that said, I think it's important also to model for them that it's okay to have feelings, to have big feelings, and crying or upset when, say, I'm in the kitchen and like making food, and they might be like, whoa, what's going on? And I'm just be like, I'm okay. I'm just feeling a lot of sadness. And I might even share with them about what I'm feeling a lot of sadness about what's happening in Gaza right now. And so I'm just feeling really like a lot of emotion, and that's why you don't need to worry, everything's okay, and that's just what's happening right now. So the more that we can frame it and create safety for them around it, let them know that they don't need to take it on or hold it or make it better or fix it, right? There's nothing they need to do. This is just what's happening. I think that's really brave modeling for them that then shows them it's okay to be having this emotional energy. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have in our society with grief, is that there's such a shutdown and such a shaming stigma around emotion and expression. People could just be more comfortable with emotion and less afraid of it. It would be living in a really different world.
So true. We're going to take a break here. I'll be back with my guest, Josea Crossley from Dark Woods of Grief. So we're back on the Mother Tree Network podcast with my guest, Josea Crossley, who's the founder of Dark Woods of Grief. So, Josia, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about how we could create community for grieving and hold space for collective grieving. What are some specifics that we can do?
Community grief ritual is a really powerful way to bring people together and create these containers that are consent-based, like I was talking about before. If everyone's coming in with that agreement of we're going to grieve together, then that can be really powerful. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a certain way. I have a year-long training to that path of holding community grief ritual and community grief work. But I think that the most important piece is recognizing our own grief. We all carry grief around what's happening in the world, the loss of nature, the ecological collapse that we're going through, genocides that are happening, the challenges of just living in colonial society where we all have to be working so hard just to be able to survive. A lot of people are like really struggling, and there's grief in that.
One of the things that I've struggled with is the idea that grief is somehow at a lower vibration. If you really want to contribute to the collective, you want to keep your vibration high, but grief is a low. Tell me how do you reconcile those things? Or
grief is energy moving, right? Grief is emotion. So it's energy moving. So I guess I would throw that question back is energy moving? Because in my opinion, energy is meant to move, it's designed to move. And it's actually when it gets stuck and when we suppress it, that's what creates the stagnancy.
Yes. Thank you. That's such a clear way to put it. And if we want to invite more people into grief, are there ways that we can do it that make it less scary or less shameful?
I think the first thing is doing the work ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? Doing the work ourselves, because if we're doing it ourselves, then we're actually embodying
Yes.
it. And when we're embodying it in a good way, then we're actually embodying that it's safe. I always say to people, my work is grief, and I probably laugh more than most people I know.
Yes.
I'm laughing all the time because laughter actually is a medicine and a great way of moving grief. Music, dancing, like these all can be ways that we move grief. So it doesn't have to be like that we're feeling bad or that we're feeling sad. It's just we're making space for the energy to move. When we gather in our online community, in a way, It is fun. We're writing about grief, but it's like just coming together, being together. We always dance too in our community as part of the process. It's like you go down and then you come up.
I love that. Thank you so much. You mentioned your program community. So, can you give us a sense of if people want to go deeper into grief and moving energy, holding it in the way that you're talking about, how would they find out more about you?
Thank you. Yeah, so we've got a couple different programs. We have a ongoing membership community called Through the Dark Woods community, and we do what we call grief and praise sessions in that community. So those are the sessions that I just was mentioning where we come in, we do some writing, and then we move into dance and movement. And yeah, it's really about moving the energy. You can join that community at any point.
Is that you said grief and praise?
Grief and praise. Yeah.
I love that.
Moving the energy is this process we call pendulation, which is like moving back and forth between the grief and the praise. I loved how when we first came together today as a group, you invited us to share gratitude, right? And that connection with something that's good is so important. We got to stay connected to that while we're grieving. Otherwise, what are we even doing it for, right? If we're not here to be connected to life.
Okay, that was profound. What are we even doing it for if we're not connected to life? So we're not grieving to just grieve. We're doing it to be more present and connected to life.
Exactly. We also have a course. I know some people are just like not ready to come into community with
Mhm.
their grief, but they want the skills, they want the practices, they want to have more understanding. So we have a 12-week course called Return from the Underworld. We run it basically once a month, so people can jump in at any point for that as well. And then we have a year-long facilitator training as well, the Darkwoods grief tending and ritual facilitation training that is open for application right now. And we start in April of 2025, our next cohort.
You know, the last thing I want to come to is in traditional Chinese medicine, fall is a time for grief, and the lungs are associated with grief.
Mhm.
And I wonder if you've ever thought about relating grief to earth cycle.
I definitely think there's a connection. We're just naturally drawn into, I think, a more introspective, reflective space as the days start to shorten, as the leaves start to fall, turn and fall. I actually secretly love September, October. Like I love the fall because it's just like this feeling of we're going in and the leaves are beautiful and it's like crisp. We're going into a descent. I had in for many years struggled with depression, especially in the winter with the shortening days, the darkness. And I think also when we have a conscious grief practice, it's so supportive because then we're going with the energy of the season, allowing the descent to happen. And there's actually so much gold in that descent. There's so much gold in that place of letting ourselves go down and in and reflect and let go. We need to not make such a big deal about it. You know what I mean? But also, I will say it requires skill to navigate that place too.
And support. There's something really exciting where I am now in my life, in my late 50s. Maybe I'm in the fall of my life in terms of my life cycle. And I too feel excited about the fall. I feel excited about the descent. And when spring comes around, I feel excited about coming back out. So thank you so much, Josia, for being with us today. Thank you for your work to move energy through your body and through us as a collective. I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Thank you so much. Really lovely to be here with you.